Welcome to Wild Heart Revival, a gathering place for heartfelt conversations and stories as pathways of renewal and revival. I am your host, Tay Tayari, and today's guest is Jan Blake. In this conversation, we delve into the art and essence of storytelling. Jan eloquently emphasizes the significance of custodianship over mere performance, highlighting the responsibility of honoring the distinct universes within each story. Jan also shares some of her personal journey in the art of storytelling, alongside some profound insights, inviting us to embrace vulnerability and authenticity in cultivating the craft of storytelling. Together we contemplate the creative power of story, as well as reflect on the beauty and complexity of the human experience amidst other inquiries. Jan Blake is a storyteller, consultant, mentor, and plenary speaker who has been performing worldwide since 1986. Born in Manchester, United Kingdom, to Jamaican parents, Jan specializes in folk tales and myths from the Caribbean, West Africa, North Africa, and the Arab regions. With a mesmerizing presence and a gift for bringing traditional tales to life, Jan has enthralled audiences across the globe. Drawing from her extensive repertoire of folk tales, myths, and legends, Jan's performances transport listeners to distant lands and ancient times, leaving them spellbound by the power of her storytelling and the medicine contained within the stories. In 2021, she launched her own online storytelling school, the Akua Storytelling Project. The school is devoted to developing a new generation of international storytellers committed to engaging on a deeper level with their storytelling practice. If you are curious about any of my other offerings, such as the personalized threshold counseling that I provide for individuals and couples, or if you would like to explore my latest essays, simply visit coyotecounsel.earth. You'll find a direct link in the show notes. Additionally, we extend an invitation for you to join our monthly newsletter, where we share updates on new podcast episodes and other creative happenings. You can easily join on our website, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our show on your preferred podcast platform. Your likes, comments, ratings, and shares also play a vital role in supporting the organic growth of these heartfelt conversations and stories. Now, let's welcome our wonderful guest, Jan Blake, as we explore what it means to honor the stories that we share. But this morning, I was reading a book by Stephen Jenkinson. Do you know?
I know who he is.
Yeah, so the book's titled Come of Age, The Case for Elderhood in a Time of Trouble. And it's an incredible read. I'm like halfway through, but I came to this part here about in the middle of the book this morning, and it felt really relevant. So I want to read it here.
Sorry, my chair's doing its thing. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Please
so when you're cozy and ready, I'd love to read this and see. I don't even have a question to tag onto it. I just want to see what naturally arises and blooms for you upon hearing it. Yeah.
Okay.
So he says, "This is it. The ending doesn't happen. The story stops, but it doesn't end. Real stories are that way, to be sure. They don't swagger across the finish line, moral in hand, slathered with life lessons free for the taking. They aren't metaphors in stories' cheap threads. They happen with the telling. They are incarnations of what they advocate. They make things happen. Real stories wonder if you, the hearer, are still there, whether you'd like to pick up the thread and ravel it into your days, whether it counts at all that you've heard it. whether you did hear it?
Well, I'm going to have to sit with that for a bit, I think. I like the bit about the story doesn't run across the finish line, moral in hand. I think that leapt out. And wondering if you heard it at all. I think one of the challenging things about the world, and I use the term very loosely because that's the term that is being used mostly, is the world of storytelling, is that I think a lot of people are more concerned with the being a teller than what they are telling, which means that people are less, they don't listen deeply enough to a story before they tell it. And I don't necessarily mean them listening to another person tell it. I mean, they don't listen deeply enough to the people in the story. They don't listen deeply enough to the concerns. They don't listen deeply enough to their own reactions and responses to the story and how that might impact on how they tell the story. They don't listen enough to its rhythms and its pulses and its paces, because a lot of people are more concerned with being a storyteller than they are about being custodian of the story. And the other thing, which is why that part about the story not being eager to run across the finish line, moral in hand, it sticks out because people often come to me at the end of the stories I tell and say, you tell very moral stories, you tell very moralistic stories. And I'm like, no, I don't. I just reflect a moment in time. I reflect, or I hope I'm honoring the landscape and cosmology of the story, that I'm advocating for the people in the story. But if you hear it as me moralizing, that's something that the story is speaking to in you. It's not something that I am bringing necessarily to the forefront of the story. I think my job is to listen deeply to what the story and what the people in the story are saying, what the story is saying, what the people in the story is saying, and to try as much as possible to speak on their behalf or to communicate on their behalf. And that's even the treacherous people, you know, in the stories. I certainly don't believe that as a storyteller, I'm here to be a goody two shoes and to only like the goody two shoes people in the stories and to kind of hold up and go, isn't that terrible what that person did? The story might say that, but I'm not going to say it, because I know as a human being, I'm just as capable of doing those terrible things. As a human being, I'm just as capable of doing beautiful things. I'm just as capable of any other human being of doing anything that anyone does in a story. So therefore, for me, there's no moral high ground to be taken. There's not unless someone in the story is taking it, then I speak for them. I'm expressing their words, not mine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I mean, that's something that always amazes me. I'm just coming to the end of a novel called Shantaram. You heard of that one?
No.
It's a really incredible novel. And, you know, I've read many wonderful novels over the years, and I'm always just amazed. And right now, this one's just very present for me, but at how a really good author can just go into such a depth of what feels like just such a depth of field of feeling that surrounds any specific character and any specific character's development throughout the arc of the story. To be able to, it almost feels like they've embodied that essence, and then they're bringing it through their words and their crafting. And of course, that's writing down stories into book form. I'm sure that it becomes different when you're telling stories in person and you're not writing, and that you're embodying that story in the moment and those characters.
Well, I'm going to stop you because
Is
I don't see them as characters. Each story for me is a little universe in of its own.
right.
A little cosmology. It's got its own cosmology. It's got its own flora, fauna. It's got its own landscape. It's got everything. So they're not character. Because the thing is, as soon as I or anyone else refers to them as characters, you can put a little distance between yourself.
Yeah.
And you can afford yourself the luxury of thinking it's not real.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
But if I say that there are people in these stories and they're asking me in that moment to give them their voice, then I have to honor the people in the story. And therefore I have to honor the story. And if I look at a story, I read a story, I hear a story, and I cannot honor it, if I find myself sitting in moral judgment or allowing my perspective to cloud their narrative, then I best step away from that story until I can get a clearer perspective. So that I can be true advocate for everyone.
Yeah.
Regardless of their behavior, regardless of whether I agree with them or don't agree with them. It's not about what I think or I believe or I know. I think it's about, I can't think of another word other than listen. It's about listening. So deep. For instance, I was working with a young storyteller this morning, and I'd given him a story to work with. And I could tell by the way he read it that the story hadn't landed with him, that he hadn't seen it, he hadn't heard it. And so what I did was I said, okay, we need to lift this story off the page, because the language in which the story is written has created a block between your ability to take it off the page and to put it in your mouth and speak it. So I said, if you can see it, then the words on the page don't become the issue. The movie of the story, what you see in here, what your imagination will allow you to see based on the words on the page, will give it life. So I kind of went through the story with him, and I broke it into its kind of rhythmic parts. Said, you've got this point to this point, you've got this happening, and then you've got this happening, and you've got to try and imagine the true emotional experience of the people in the story while these things are happening to them. If we stand back and we say that thing happened over there, but we can't hear the human aspect. If someone goes away for 9 months, hears you're pregnant, this is an element of the story. Your lover hears you're pregnant and then disappears for 9 months. And then they come back. And the story says he came back and she was so happy to see him. I said, yeah, that's going to be there. But there's also, because they're human beings, they're people, there's also going to be an element of, where the hell have you, I've been out of my mind with worry. That's not going to be at the forefront of the story, but it's going to be there because they're human beings having a human experience. So once I kind of went through the story and talked about it from the perspective of human experience and being able to visualize the human experience, because you're a human being who's had human experiences, and you can put yourself in the shoes of anyone who's having a human experience. Once we went through that process, he said, can I have a go at it? And I said, are you sure you don't want to do a few more? And he went, no, I just want to have a go at it. And bam, He was in, and it was beautiful.
Mm.
It was beautiful because suddenly the whole landscape of the story, which he couldn't see because of the words on the page, were released, and he could experience it as he was telling it. It became what it was as he was telling it. And it was a beautiful moment to witness that transition from these are words on a page of a story that I'm reading, but I have absolutely no connection with, to being totally connected and totally immersed, because he was able to understand it from the point of view of I've got to speak for them. They're not going to speak for themselves, so I've got to speak for them. So what Stephen Jenkinson says in the book is true. It is happening in the moment as you're telling it, if you allow it.
Yeah.
If you're prepared to get up close and personal with what's happening. And it doesn't have to be overly performative for that to happen. Sometimes people can be too performative, and then that gets in the way. You think, no, you're getting in the way of the story. Just step to one side a little bit, or try and recognize the nuances that would be in this moment if you can. The challenge, I think, is to be 100% open to all of that in the moment of telling it. Not prepared, not word perfect or any of those things, but to take the risk of yourself being 100% in this moment with the people in the story who are experiencing it in that moment, with the audience who are experiencing it in that moment. If we could all be, all three places in one place, totally present, and you can trust yourself to take everyone on that journey with you, the people in the story, the people listening to the story, yourself, to straddle that space that exists between those 3 points, to be totally vulnerable then, totally human then, and not storyteller.
Yeah.
Then it's a really, I can't think of another word. I know this word is overused, but it's a very authentic experience then.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. You jump off the roof. It doesn't matter if you fall and bounce. It doesn't matter if you fall and break. It doesn't matter if you break one thing. It doesn't matter if you stand on your legs when you jump. You jump in the knowledge that it's okay to be human here. I don't know if that's answered your question at all, but
oh, it absolutely did. Thank you so much for starting off with that important reframe of them not being, it's not characters there, that there's this actual animated, living, dynamic world unfolding in the present moment.
yeah.
With forces, like mythic forces, flowing through and guiding the process. And a few questions came up for me. I'm wondering if maybe I can meld a couple of them. I was thinking about like how, maybe in what ways you might see how personal identity, including like cultural heritage, might intertwine to shape a storyteller's craft. And also how that interesting topic of authenticity, like how then to bridge the potential gap of authenticity in performance, or how to strike that balance in the context of bringing your identity, bringing your culture to the story.
I think because I'm part of the diaspora, my parents are from Jamaica. I was born here in England. And there's always, I grew up with this very strong sense from my parents mainly that I wasn't quite it. Not just me and my siblings. We weren't quite it because we weren't born in Jamaica. Therefore, there were things that should have been already in our DNA that wasn't there. And there was almost a sense of, you should know this. not the sense that we shouldn't have to teach you these things. So my mum used to say, "You England-born children," and it was always a sense of, "But it's not my fault. It's not my fault. I'm born in England. That there's a missing part." And it's not that I judge my parents for coming here or anything like that, but it was very much a sense of you grow up knowing there's something missing. And then not only you grow up feeling that there's something missing, your parents are always talking about home, and home isn't here, but you're here. So there's another kind of split, another fracture, because the parents are always talking about going home. And you think, is that my home? Is it just your home? So if you go home, what do I call home? Where do I call home? Should I be calling this place home? Should I be calling that place home? And I would say when I first began storytelling, it was a time in my life when I was so enraged and so angry about the injustices of being born in England to Jamaican parents, the whole dilemma of second generation children in a school system that didn't hold up much hope for children of the second generation Caribbean community, and all of those things. That narrative is running alongside the narrative of, well, you're got a little bit missing because you weren't born there. And I was quite an enraged person. This kind of this tussle, let's say, this inner tussle. So when I became a storyteller, it then became kind of a release valve, like a pressure cooker. So when I became a storyteller, it was like the steam started to come out of the pressure cooker.
Okay.
And I began to identify people who looked like me, sounded like me. I started off telling Jamaican folk tales to begin with, but people sounded like me, people looked like me, I understood the language of the people in the story. Suddenly I was just like, oh my gosh, it's me. And even though it was a me one generation removed, I could recognize the things my mum had said, the songs my mum sang, just cooking in the kitchen. Everything kind of started to fall into place.
Wow.
And so I could use the things I'd heard at home in these stories when I was telling and sharing these stories. So it was very much a case of storytelling became an act of plugging holes, restitching, and darning, using the stories to do a bit of darning, and then realizing that the more stitching and darning I was doing, actually, I was building a foundation as well. I was speaking with a friend the other day, and I was saying, it's like you stand where you are, and then you build the floorboards out. You don't build a room first and then walk in. It feels like that's what I've been doing with storytelling, is start where I am, and then little by little make the flooring that takes me out into a wider and wider space. So whereas I started off as a storyteller, just a storyteller performer, as the years have passed, I'm kind of building these floorboards and spreading out. So now I'm storyteller teacher, and I've become storyteller elder, and I've become all of these things just by starting where I was, and trusting that each step that I took out would lead me to where I needed to be. So I never had an idea of myself and what a storyteller was or what a storyteller meant. I've discovered those things as I've told stories. The most important thing was to tell the stories. The most important thing was to give life to the stories and to co-create the moments in the moment with the audience, and to enjoy the thrill and the community of that, the joy of hearing those voices and seeing those people and watching those faces, and allowing myself to be fully immersed and to fully embody the moments of the story, and to see how far I am willing to go in service of the story.
Mm-hmm. I love that. The path appears by walking it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if anything comes up for you right now when you think back around that process of starting as storyteller, performer, and then building out that floor from the center of your being as you went on. Like, what were some of the things that were most challenging for you to work with, transform within yourself, and how you're relating to that process?
I just did it, you know.
Mm.
What was difficult is other people putting on you something. I just did it. I just did. I had no idea when I started storytelling that I was a storyteller. First of all, someone told me I was a storyteller, and someone demanded that I keep doing this for the rest of my life. So I said, okay. So I kept going.
Wow.
And the person called Ben Haggerty, he runs the Crick Crack Club. And Ben basically had my back from the minute he saw me tell the story. He had my back, and he's had my back 38 years later. He's still got my back. He still told everyone the best storyteller in the world, Jan Blake. And I've never said that about myself. It's not something I would ever lay claim to. But he basically refused to allow me to not be what he saw I was. And then there was a storyteller from Haiti called Mimi Bartholomew. She died sadly some years ago. And she said to me, you don't tell stories, you are stories. So these people who've been doing it for a long time have kind of said, I see you. Don't give up. Don't give that up. That thing there, you're doing it, and you keep doing it no matter what happens. So I said, oh, all right. So that's what, so I didn't have challenges in terms of there was no internal struggle, no internal battle about telling stories. Maybe internal battle about applied storytelling, maybe internal battle about wanting to stay true to oracy and not feel that the need to present what I do in some form of recognizable academic context. You know, I wanted to shrug all that off. I just wanted to tell stories. I just wanted to relate to people. I just wanted to be able to recognize there might be a learning in this moment, in this story. You know, I just wanted to play and enjoy. And it doesn't matter how dark the story is, I can still play and enjoy. You know, that's what I wanted. And that's what I continued to do, really. So the challenge was more having I would say the biggest challenges were if you are lucky enough to be gifted something, right? And you can't help that, it's your gift. Other people have told me that's your gift, keep working with that gift. You work with that gift. And then you encounter people who are challenged by how readily available to you your gift is. Right. That can then become an issue of, well, you didn't work for it. It was gifted to you. You didn't work for it, so it's not meaningful enough. And because you know, I haven't written books about it, and I haven't done this, and I haven't done that. Over the years, I've gathered wisdom through working with other storytellers and reading books and things like that. But I'm in the place of talking I'm in the place of dialogue. I'm in the place of podcasts and conversations. That's where I like to be. And I like to teach in that way as well, through conversation, through demonstration, through reflection. Do you know what I mean? But I don't come at things from this very worked out step by step perspective.
Yeah, I'm gathering that there's this important relationship that you have with improvisation and the emergent terrain.
And people.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, you know, to be in relationship to people, to enjoy the relationship with others as part of this development and this part of growth, this improvisational readiness, alertness. And the thing is, when you're telling stories, you've got to be alert anyway.
Oh yeah.
It's not about, like I said, if I fix what I'm going to say and something happens to disrupt that moment and I lose my words and I lose, then where do I go if I'm not prepared to be on my toes, ready and alert at any given moment?
Yeah.
You know, it is the challenge of being present.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I think before we started recording, how Buddhism and the teachings involved in whatever lineages you've found yourself in, I imagine that they've been really helpful in your storytelling capacities and your orientation to telling stories. I would be curious to learn about that, but before we get into that, before we get too far away from something I was thinking earlier, which is, I would love to hear, if you have something available to you, one of the foundational stories. You're talking about the early days of you learning stories and sharing them before you even really knew that that's what your calling was. Do you remember any of these foundational stories? And is there one that you might feel drawn to share with us today?
You know, I don't remember any of them enough to tell them.
Okay.
I could send you one and you could use it in some way. You know, there's a video of myself telling a story the day when I was told, you are a storyteller and you have to tell it for the rest, you have to do this for the
You
rest
have
of
a
your life.
recording of that?
I have a recording of that.
Oh wow. Yeah, please send that to me and I'll put it in the show notes when this is
Yeah,
published.
I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Because that I hadn't seen that. I hadn't
Oh,
seen that video until 2022. I hadn't seen it. So I
oh,
did not know what he had seen. I was just there doing what I was doing, which was
yeah.
enjoying telling this story in the Jamaican vernacular. You know, I'm saying this now because I've watched the video. I'm very clear on what happened. But if you'd asked me before I saw that, I couldn't say what had happened.
So what was it like to see that video of
It
yourself?
was amazing. You
Yeah.
know, I was just like, oh my God. I now know why Ben said what he said and why he responded the way that he responded, because I did not realize. And when we had a 30-year anniversary celebration of the Crick Crack Club, and he invited some of the kind of the foundational members of the Crick Crack Club, myself being one of them, to tell stories. And he asked me to tell 2 stories. So I kind of top and tailed it, kind of thing. And what was incredible was when he got up to introduce me. So this is how unaware I was. And sometimes it's dangerous to be unaware of your impact. I know. But I really didn't realize. And he stood up and he said, the day this woman entered the world of storytelling changed the face of UK storytelling forever. And then said, ladies and gentlemen, Jan Blake. And I was like, I didn't know that.
Huh.
I didn't know that
Hmm.
I'd had that impact. on the face of UK storytelling. I just didn't have any concept of that. And then when I saw the video, I was like, oh, I see.
Wow.
Because at that time, I'd only been telling for 6 months. I'd only been storytelling for 6 months.
Okay.
I was a complete newbie. I was just relying 100% on the joy of performing stories. So there was no knowledge, no clear knowledge of what any of it meant, other than I really like this, I'm going to keep doing it. And he says I should keep doing it, and she says I should keep doing it, so I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, and the magic
Then,
of beginner's mind too.
But then the elderhood aspect, the growing into your bones of a craft, growing into the wisdom of a craft, going beyond just the performing of it. And then as you deepen as a human being, as life has its way with you, etc., some stories take on more meaning, or one moves from what could be perceived as the shallow end of storytelling and swim further and further out towards the deep end, you know. But that's only possible if life has kind of picked you up and shaken you around a bit and turned you upside down and emptied all your pockets and twisted you this way and twisted you that way and then stood you back on your feet. You know, it's like, wow, what a ride. Do you know what I mean? But also, I get that. I get why that woman in that story feels that way. Or I get why this man in this story behaves in that way, you know, because I've been more exposed to what life is. When I first started storytelling, I'd only been exposed to my anger about the injustices. You know, I hadn't really been exposed to deeper aspects of living and deeper aspects of being human, which means that the stories that I choose or started to choose as I grew older in age and deeper in experience started to reflect those things. So I can't, and also, you know, I'm one of these people who, if I'm not feeling it, I can't tell a story anyway. So even if I could remember those foundational stories, if I'm not with it, I mean, in here, then telling it would be performative.
Right.
And I want it to be real. I want it to be so real that I can access it immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. Love
It's
that.
okay.
Well, it makes me think then, well, what's a story that's really alive for you right now? Like, is there one that's really present for you and living within you these days that you could share with us? I'm so curious.
Okay, I've got to go through the database because I like big, long, fat stories.
Right. Yeah.
So let me go. There's one South African story.
Yeah. Okay.
Which you may have come across actually, because it's one of those stories. You know, there's so many stories out there that have been told and retold and overtold that you approach it and you think, this is becoming a shtick. This story in the world of telling stories, but
well, I'm sure that we would all be able to feel the freshness of whatever you're able to bring.
Okay, I'll tell it and then I'll leave it with you. Okay. And you take from it what you can or what you will. Once upon a time, there was a farmer. He had 7 beautiful white cattle. Beautiful they were, and they gave the best milk, and everyone in the region would come with their calabashes to take his milk, and he would dutifully milk his cows, and people would very happily, having paid their money, go away with their calabashes full of the delicious creamy milk from the 7 white cows. And one day, the farmer, who lived alone and was quite lonely, came out to check his cows, and their udders were empty, which was strange. This had never happened before, and he couldn't understand why this was happening. The next day, the same thing. The udders were empty. There was no milk. The people came. They complained bitterly because they had to go away with their calabashes empty, and he couldn't understand. And on the third night, these were 3 nights of a full moon. On the third night, he decided to sit up and see if people were stealing his milk. He stood by the side of his house and he watched. And from the moon in the sky, the full moon in the sky, he noticed a beam, a shaft of light that literally came down from the moon and hit the pasture. And then he noticed 7 beautiful women, each carrying a calabash bowl, descend on the moonbeam. And each woman went to a cow, put the calabash bowl underneath, rested her face against the side of the cow, and filled the bowl until it was right to the top. And then each with their calabash bowls, put their bowls on their head. And the first one went up, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth. And before the 7th could step into the moonbeam, the farmer said, you and those women, you're all thieves. You're stealing my cattle, my milk from my cattle. If you steal my milk from my cattle, how do I sell? How do I make money? How do I live? Have you no conscience? The least you could do is stay here with me. To pay for the milk that you've stolen for 3 nights, you stay here with me and become my wife. And the woman, she looked at the man and she could see the loneliness in his eyes, that it wasn't really rage. She could see that he was so lonely, and she could see that he'd become enamored of her because she and her sisters were beautiful. And after giving it some consideration, she said, farmer, you're right. We should have asked. But where I come from, there is not milk such as this. Your milk is the best milk in the land. And so we decided, and now if you would give your permission, my sisters would like to come down every so often on a full moon and drink the milk, take some back to our people. And if you give permission, I'll gladly stay and be your wife. Just let me take this milk up to my people, say my goodbyes, and I'll be back. He couldn't believe his luck. And he said, really? She said, I promise you, I promise you. And so he let go of her and she went up the moonbeam and did what she had to do, and she returned that same night. He couldn't believe it. He was so happy. And he noticed that she didn't bring any other possessions apart from a small basket. And she said to him, I will live with you on one condition. This basket is my basket. Don't ask me about the basket. Don't look in the basket. Don't talk about the basket. When the time is right, I will share with you everything that is contained in my basket. Do you agree? And he said, of course I agree, of course. And so the moon woman moved into the house with the farmer, and she put her basket in a safe place, and they lived together happily as husband and wife. Every so often, she'd go to the safe place where she kept the basket. She'd take the basket, she'd remove the lid, she'd look in the basket, she would smile, she'd put the lid back on the basket and replace it, put it back in its secret place, its safe place. And at first he noticed it, but he didn't think anything of it. And they got on with their day, and they got on with their weeks, their months, their years together, and it was beautiful. And every so often her sisters would come down on the moonbeam, and they would milk the cattle, and the sisters and they would talk and laugh, and sometimes they would even stay and have some food before returning. After about 10, 15 years of love and joy and respect, and her looking into the basket and smiling into the basket, never once offering to share with him what was in the basket, she said to her husband, my sisters come and they milk and they sit and they talk, but my parents, they miss me. I'm going to go up. With your permission, I'll return to my people. I'll stay 3 days and then I'll return to you. And he said, of course, my wife, you must go. And so the next time her sisters came down on the moonbeam, she returned with them. And the husband, it was the first time he'd been on his own in such a long time. And he sat around in his house, and she'd prepared lots of food for him so that he wasn't ever hungry. And everything was beautiful. And then, he's sitting around and he started to get a little bit bored. And he started to think about, what his wife had brought to him, and he began to think about what she'd brought with her when she came to him, and he began to think about the basket. He said, imagine that. 15 years together, and she's never once, not once, invited me to look into that basket. What's so special about that basket anyway? What is so special that a wife can't share with her husband after 15 years? And so he found himself walking towards the place where she kept the basket. And even though the word in the back of his head said, don't do it, he didn't listen. And he took the basket down from where it was, and he sat it and looked at it for a while. Then he found himself lifting the lid and looking into the basket. He looked again. There was nothing there. It was empty. There was absolutely nothing in the basket. And he said to himself, after all that fuss, 15 years looking in the basket, smiling in the basket, and there's nothing in the basket. Typical. Put the lid back, and he replaced it. On the third day of the full moon, his wife returned. And when he saw her, his heart was so happy, his heart soared, and he embraced her and she embraced him. And he said, come inside, let's eat together. And they sat and they ate. And then she stood up and she went to where she kept her basket. She took her basket down, she opened the lid, she looked inside. She looked at him. She said, have you been looking in my basket? Me? No, you told me not to look in your basket. Why would I look in your basket? She said, you have looked into this basket. He said, I have not looked into this basket. And even if I had looked into the basket, you've been looking into it 15 years, looking into it, smiling, not sharing with me, keeping it all to yourself. And anyway, there's nothing in there. So what's all the fuss? If I want to look into a basket in my house, it's my house. I'll do what I like. She said, you're not the man I thought you were. You're not the man I thought you were. I can't stay here. And he said, what do you mean you can't stay here? It's only a basket. There's not. She said, you don't understand. I was ready to share with you everything. I was ready to share with you all the wonders that I kept in my basket, but you didn't have patience. You didn't trust me, and now I can't trust you. I must return to my people. He said, don't be ridiculous. You don't have to return to your people. I made a mistake. I'll never look at it again. She said, no, you won't, because I'm taking the basket and I'm going home. And no matter how he begged, no matter how he pleaded, no matter how he went on his knees and promised he would never do it again, she said, it's too late. The spell has been broken. I must return to my people. And on that same moonbeam, she went up into the heavens, and he never saw her again. And that's the end of that story.
Wow.
I'm just going to adjust the light slightly. I can't find my right and proper lighting, so I'm afraid we're having to use my iPhone light. Sorry about that. Sorry about that, people.
No worries. We can still see you fine. Wow. Yeah. It just reminds me of just how often I am being brought to thresholds of my level of patience and my ability to have a real depth, a real rooted depth of patience and trust and faith in the process that's at hand. Faith in my own life and in all the moving parts of it, and the others that I'm in relationship with, to trust that things are happening in the time that they must. And when I get in the way of that, I throw myself, it's like I alienate myself when I try to get in the way by controlling or knowing. And that the surrender to the unknown, the surrender to being willing to face what's present when I'm not grasping at some kind of outcome, just so important. So thank you for sharing that story. It feels very poignant for me, as good stories tend to be, right?
Thank you. I wasn't fully in it because I've just come back from hot yoga, but
well, I felt like I was in it through your telling of it, so I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
It makes me think too about relationship and community actually came up for me. And I started to think, like, wondering maybe what kind of sense you have that um, myths, folklore, stories, how they serve as not only reflective catalysts for individual human experience, but also as invitations for community healing and or resilience building, and what some of the important threads might be of that, um, important to mention or in
Mhm.
relation to your understanding around that topic.
Again, I think I find that quite a challenging question, not because I don't like the question, but because, you know, what is community beyond, where do people tell stories
Hmm.
generally? We
Hmm.
tell stories in kind of false constructs. We tell stories mainly in a black box or in a theatre, or the closest I get to community and storytelling is schools,
Okay.
because schools are children's first experience of what community is.
Hmm.
And so I would say, in terms of community connection, etc., I think first you have to find a community and build a community before you can even talk about what a community needs from a story.
Mm. Hmm.
You
Yeah,
know, a
but
community, from my perspective as a child of the diaspora, migrant parents,
yeah.
community was the Caribbean community, and the threads of story, proverbs, folklore, etc., is what bound us together.
Mm.
But did that help us in any way? I don't know if it did. And I'm not saying that to be bloody minded. I'm not sure it did.
Right.
Because
Hmm.
if it did, so when you go out now and you do go into elder spaces, and there's an elder space where I go and tell stories, and they're Caribbean elder space. They love it when I go in and tell stories. They love when we sing folklore and songs and that stuff. But it's a special occasion where I go in and I do it. It's not something that's happening naturally, normally within that community. And there's layers of community connection that are being dissipated daily. For instance, in the Caribbean community, if somebody died, everybody knew about it. And everybody would be there in community. People would go to funerals, not just to funerals, 9 nights of, or the setup, they call it, where you go and you sit with the family and they talk about the person's life and they sing songs and tell stories and eat food and play dominoes and all of these things. It's all part of community engagement. So I think Caribbean people are more likely to engage in a community setting when somebody dies, because that is the one thing that we all remember, because that is the one thing we all know is going to happen to us. And
Mm.
we're all in agreement with that. But recently, someone died and they didn't tell anyone. And that, I said to my sister, that is the first sign that we're losing our connection,
Mm.
because it's the first time someone in the community died and nobody knew, and
Yeah.
nobody went to the funeral, and nobody went to the setup, and there was no 9 night, and there was no talking about her life, and there was no celebration. It was as though the European fear of death had taken over her family, and they couldn't respond the way the elders would have responded to a death, which is, there is no fear here, there is no loss here, there is only a celebration of a life.
Mm.
And we do that together.
Mm.
So I think
Huh.
the idea of what is community speaking as a Black woman, it's hard to understand what Europeans mean when they say community.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying that in a disparaging way. It just means that I can't quite grasp what people mean when they're saying community building, because I'm second generation and I still don't feel as though this is my country. So when we talk about community, whose community? Where's the community? How do I feel part of a community? I know the people who love me. I know the people I went to school with that I'm still friends with. Is that my community? Like I said, I know the Caribbean community and their concerns, but that's only to a certain generational level. And after that, what happens to community? It's difficult
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
answer it beyond my experience, and I don't want to buy into a romanticized idea of what community building is,
Hmm.
because that's not a narrative that I feel is coming from me or through me. It's something I hear a lot about, but I don't quite understand it.
Yeah.
And because there are so many nuances around the sense of what does it mean to belong somewhere, that impact on community and the idea of community. And I'm still wrestling with belonging.
Yeah. I very much am as well. I'm really glad that you brought us in this direction from that question, because I I've struggled, I haven't felt a part of what I imagine a community might be. And I like you're kind of drawing out, like, how do I even construct that in my mind? Do I revert back to some old image of what it might have been, or how does it become emergent and now? But when I look into the now, I don't feel that. I've never experienced that. When I gaze out with my eyes, I don't see it happening in ways that draw me in. So then I feel separate to that process that I imagine might be there, or is it even there? And so, yeah, I guess maybe a different way to say it would be like culture building, because we are consistently in this changing flow of tending to the culture, and there is an over culture that tends to dominate, and yet there are these little pockets, and these are what people might consider communities, right? These little pockets of culture making. And
But what does culture making mean?
yeah, well, this is my curiosity, I guess, with the question originally, is
Yeah.
how do our stories guide us in those processes? So maybe I don't know what culture making means, but how might the stories that underlie my life as I'm writing it in the now, how do those stories guide me toward an understanding of that? Or yeah,
I think maybe stories are memory more than anything.
tell me
They're
more.
there to maybe stories are there to remind us
Mm,
of what we're in danger of losing, without kind of being melodramatic. I'm not being melodramatic at all. I
I don't
think,
feel
yeah, it's maybe that's what they are, more than ways to make culture. Maybe they're there to remind us of who we are, what we are, people as people. Because I think people talk about, they're quite abstract concepts to me:
mhm,
community building, culture making. But if you talk about life to life connection with another human being, if you talk about the fundamental needs of human beings, if you talk about recognizing the dignity of life, if you talk about honoring the thing that is in all life that might be buried under detritus and trauma. I hate that word. I'm so sick of it. But, buried under all of those aspects of life, underneath all of that is the fundamental truth that we should all be afforded the dignity of life. We
mm,
should all be respected we should all be recognized as being an essential microcosm of the greater dreaming, if you want to call it that, that we're the tiny dream and the tiny dreamer, but there's a greater dreaming that happened, and that we're all here to honor that greater dreaming, that greater universal truth about being human, that isn't about the minutia of being human, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
It absolutely does to me. Yeah. I instantly thought how we are emanations, we are momentary, organic waves in the sea of this dream that Gaia or Earth is having at this time. And it made me think about how, like, because as I was saying, and as I think is really obvious when you consider it, like stories are what really guide us. The story of myself and self and other and environment and how I see the world, it's held up by the stories that I carry or that we carry together. And I've been thinking recently about like what might it mean to rewild our stories. And
Again, that's a term that I'm hearing a lot, and I don't know what it means, because
yeah,
I grew up
right,
being told that being wild was wrong, being wild was bad,
right.
particularly if you are highly melanated, like
Mm,
you are at the extreme scale,
mhm.
the extreme end of wildness, and that should be discouraged at all cost. So I find it really fascinating that the idea of what wildness is and rewilding and being the wild self and all that kind of stuff is
Yeah,
now being, by the very people who spent decades telling indigenous people and melanated people, don't do that, don't be that, you're not allowed to be that, get it out of your system now. And now the very people who historically have taken that position, then actually maybe what we need to be doing, and it's like, what? The
right.
frustration of it
Wow.
all,
Doubt, no
you
doubt.
know. But I just want to come back to this idea of, you said something that sparked a thought. I think I'm going to try and find the thread of it, which is to do with what culture making or community building, if we as individual people can honor individual people, not just because we like them, not just because they like the same things that we like, not because they come from the same country that we come from, none of those things. If we can get right down to the guts of what it is that we share universally and generally, and if we can honor those aspects of human existence, knowing that everybody, to a certain extent, and I'm generalizing like mad, but we all have needs. We all know what love is. We all know what fear is. We all know what desire is. We all know what loss is. We all know what grief is. Most of us live with fear of death. Some of us have been programmed to understand and accept death. We're all moving in and out of these big questions about being human,
Mhm.
even if it is a slight echo in the distance, even if it's not right up here and close to us. We're all dealing with that all the time.
Yeah.
And if we can find the connections there in our day-to-day interactions with other people, then we don't have to kind of have this overview, or we don't have to have this grand idea of what culture making is. The culture is to honor each other. That's
Mhm.
the culture. It doesn't have to be a grand idea. It
Mhm.
can be a day-to-day, being in the mundane, meeting your, the dry cleaner or the cab driver, or that's where it happens in your day-to-day mundane interactions. That's where we build community. That's where we build culture, and the stories remind us of how to do it. But I think that we've gotten so far away from the ordinary and the mundane as the foundation for all of these things, that we approach it from a kind of a highbrow place. But that's not where it happens. It happens in your home with your family member. It happens with your neighbor. It happens with people you sit on the train with, or on the bus with, or on the air. You know what I mean? It happens in the mundane and the ordinary.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And the mundane and the ordinary is this product of the colonized mind and heart and body of our humanity, of what used to be more wild. And I guess that's what comes up for me in this idea of rewilding, or we could think of another term of, basically, I think that our language and our stories originally they came from the land. Over a long time that shifted and changed, and they became more myopic and more focused on the human and more civilized and contained. And it makes me just wonder how the mundane, for example, could be given more life, could be bolstered in its capacity to reach into greater depths of experience and connection through some kind of cultivation of more wildness, by turning to the aspects of our earth and our landscapes and maybe the edges of our communities that actually give life to our humanity. Like, we are given life through the wilds, and we have this sense that we are separate, that we have found some level of containment, but we've only gotten to this point because of the wildness and the dreaming of earth. And it's that sense of separation and that colonized mind that really maybe leads to so much dysfunction in the way we relate to each other, or our inability to be fully present in a mundane moment. I'm kind of trying to gather so many different thoughts that I'm sensing right now, but I'm curious what comes up for you in that
What
reflection.
comes up for me is, and again, without being disparaging in any way,
Yeah.
I think when I think about the African stories that I tell, I wouldn't say containment and maybe you can tell when you read a book of African stories, when a colonialist hand has had its way with the story, because you're like, that doesn't quite sound right. Someone's trying to tie this up neatly in a bow and make it beautiful and pretty. And I think that's one of the, maybe, and again, I'm just extemporizing. I'm not right, I don't know. But I'm wondering if this need to relate to this idea of rewilding, or to relate to the past in a very romanticized way, is because colonizers don't like anything to be messy.
Yeah.
But we're living in messy times.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this need to get back to the way it used to be, because that made more sense and that's really who we are. The challenge in that is, but it's a big fat mess.
Mm-hmm.
And mess is also part of being human.
Mm-hmm.
Mess is also part of the human experience. Cycles of chaos and then reconnection. It's part of what we do. It's part of what we are. is it right to say we wouldn't have gotten this way if there hadn't been colonizers? Is that really the answer? I don't know. I'm not saying I know the answer.
It's a good question, for
But
sure.
it's a question I'm left with, because all I can think is, yeah, but human beings have always messed it up. However you kind of identify the eras of messed upness.
Yeah.
We're human beings. We do this.
Mm.
There has never been a perfect era to be human.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
We wrestle with our fundamental darkness, and we wrestle with our highest self. That's what we do. When we lean too heavily into our fundamental darkness, we get the mess that we're living with now.
Yeah.
If we can redress the balance through story, through spiritual endeavor, through self-reflection, mainly through self-reflection, and we can then lean more in the direction of our deepest, highest self, purest, deepest, highest self, then we can keep things maybe in some form of equilibrium. But to deny that human beings are capable, all human beings are capable of creating the mess that we find ourselves in now, is a denial of one aspect of human beings, that is there's two sides of a coin. You know, I was at a Buddhist meeting recently, and one of our teachers was saying, you know, life is a very particular phenomenon, and this thing called life can manifest in lots of different ways. You can have a happy life, a sad life, a depressed life. It is all life. He says it's like H2O. Still water. It's ice, it's water. It's warm, it's water. It's freezing cold, it's water. It's raging, it's water. It's a trickling stream, it's water. It's a babbling brook, it's water. It's filthy, it's still water. It's still essentially water. And the thing is, human beings, we have these aspects of ourselves that we're always trying to bring into balance. But I think as soon as we say, this isn't us, only this part is really us, this good part, this pure part, this clean part, is denying the other side of what it means to be human. And we're now living in the midst of the other side of what it means to be human. And we all go through it. We go through it on a daily basis, on a day-to-day, mundane level. We go through it on a global level. We grow through it on a deeply interpersonal level. We're always that wrestling between who we are and who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, for me, it's quite difficult to grasp these terms, because it feels like it's coming from the outside, whereas the question about it's got to come from inside. So, you know, I know it's part of the language at the moment. I know it's what people are talking about, but I find it confusing because I've no idea collectively what it might mean.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like this tendency for many people to turn away from the chaos that's inherent in life is actually, to me, seems like a symptom of being going into that extreme of that balancing process of going a little bit far into some sense that there's some kind of purity to reach, or that there's some kind of best way to be, or some kind of even like a moral high ground to stand on of what it means to be a human today in 2024.
Yeah.
And that there seems to be this thread of fear of turning toward the chaos, turning toward the wildness, the emergent wildness of life and experience, because you can't really direct that, you can't control that. And it does seem like many thousands of years, and especially in the last hundreds of years, that many cultures around the globe have had this fixation on controlling the environment, controlling each other and ourselves, and that the medicine of the chaos and the wildness might be important to turn to and to be more inclusive in that way to these aspects of self that might have been turned away from or shoved under the carpet, for lack of a better term. And that, I guess that's what my curiosity was, is like, how can our stories in the way that they shape us maybe support us on an individual level and collective level in welcoming in more aspects of the potential self, more aspects of,
That's a huge question. And
absolutely.
I feel totally unqualified to answer it. I really do. I honestly, I'll be
Yeah.
honest with you. I feel unqualified to answer it because, you know, I'm not entirely sure yet, still, add whatever, connected word you want, what it actually means. What I know is that if I work on transforming the darker aspects of myself, transforming them, and that I can hold out the conviction that everyone is capable of doing that. Even if they don't do it, they're capable of it, because it comes with the territory of being human, just as the darkness comes, but also the light comes, and everyone is capable of all of those things. But my concern is how I impact on other people. And that's how I try to culture build. I try to make sure that when I'm engaging with other human beings, that they have a saying in Buddhism, 9 thoughts to 1 word, that I'm being so aware of whether or not what I'm saying or doing or my behaviors are being generated by careless emotion, that I don't know how I'm landing or impacting on the person in front of me, the person who's right here in front of me. So to be more careful or full of care is the first step to me.
Yeah.
Be full of care for the person in front of you, not some grand idea. I can't relate to it beyond these individual meetings, which then become collective meetings, which then become a collective shift in perspective, hopefully. But it has to start with, what am I doing? What are my internal causes? And therefore, if my internal causes are having external effects, it's there for me to see. And that, I can't think of any other way to do it or to deal with it, because the bigger the idea of it, or the more needy the idea of it becomes, the less I can understand what's being asked of me.
Yeah.
But I do know that if I meet someone in the street, that I have to honor that life. And that I need to check myself when I'm on the verge of not honoring that life. 9 thoughts to 1 word. And to me, that's how it begins. And then there's so many stories that show us what happens when you don't honor a life. There's so many stories that show when you do make yourself bigger than someone else and belittle someone else, what the resulting events will be. That stories show us all the time. And I think you're right. We are more focused on the human and less on the landscape. But I think because we've come to that point, we have to start at that point and radiate out.
Yeah, that was so well said. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks
Um,
for giving me the opportunity to figure it out through talking, because I had no idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And knowing too that there maybe isn't anything to like fully figure out, that we're just in the questions of it. I just interviewed someone last week, and something he said was that he was just reminding through a poem us of the importance that our questions are horizons, that we're always moving out toward them, that we never really actually find some kind of static position to stake the ground in, that we're being guided toward ever deeper layers of this process, inquiring into what it means to be an individual enmeshed in infinite relationships on this earth at this time. So I'm really grateful for you for being with the questions with me today. And we're at the end of this conversation, and I just want to hand it over to you and offer you a moment of sharing anything that feels important, if anything is present for you, or anything that you want to tie up, any thoughts or feelings before we really end this today.
No, not thoughts or feelings, but I could give you another story, a quick one if you want.
That's even more preferable. Absolutely, please.
So once upon a time, there was a man from the east, and once upon a time, there was a man from the west. And the man from the east saw a plot of land and said, "This land is mine." And he drove a stake into the ground. The man from the west, he said the same thing, "This land is mine." And he drove a stake into the ground. And the man from the east said, "No, this land is mine." And the man from the west said, "No, this land is mine. No, this land is mine," to the man from the east. "This land is mine," to the man from the west. And then they began to spit hot words at each other, filthy hot words. When the filthy hot words were spat and there were none left, they began to poke and prod and shove. And then one man punched the other, then the other punched back. And before you knew it, the man from the west and the man from the east were rolling on the ground fighting. "This land is mine, now it's mine, get off, it's mine." An old woman came tapping along, tapping along, tapping along. She poked them both with her stick and she said, "What's this?" "This land is mine," to the man from the west. "No, this land is mine," to the one from the east. "It's mine," to the one. "Wait," said the old woman, "wait." And the old woman, holding onto her stick, she lowered herself down to the ground, pushed her hair behind her ear. She pressed her ear to the ground. The two men, they watched her for a while, full of curiosity, and they said, "Old woman, what are you doing?" She said, "I'm asking the mother." She listened, and she listened. And they watched her listen. And after a while, they said, "Well?" She said, "I've spoken to the mother, and the mother has spoken to me." "Well," they said, "what does the mother say?" And the old woman said, "The mother said to tell you that she doesn't belong to you, man from the west, and she doesn't belong to you, man from the east. One day you will die, and your flesh and your bones and your sinew and your hair and your eyes will feed this land. And people will come and they will sow their crops and they will eat. They will eat that which grows from your bodies, which are buried deep in the mother. The mother said to tell you, she doesn't belong to you. You belong to her." And the old woman took her walking stick. She tapped, 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 tapped. And that's the end of that story.
Yeah. Wow. So grateful for you being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure. And
And thanks for allowing me my total confusion in the face of your questions.
Me too. Yeah, me too. As we slowly and hopefully humbly find our way along these through lines of our humanity together. That story was such a wonderful way to wrap it up. Is there anything that you want to direct people to specifically?
Yes, I do. So, for those who are in Europe and beyond, actually, if you're feeling brave, in July, I'm running a weekend retreat called Africa Dreaming. It'll be happening at a wonderful place called Kai Mabon, which is run by Eric Madden, who's a well-known storyteller and elder in the storytelling community. And it's in Snowdonia in Wales. And it'll be 3 days exploration of a myth, a creation myth from the Ijao people, who are from the Niger Delta side of Nigeria. So they're not the dominating culture, which is Yoruba. They're the Ijao, small community whose region has been blighted by oil and been blighted by deforestation and so many things affecting these people right now. But this creation myth, which is a beautiful, beautiful myth, which is really about the nature of gratitude. When you choose your life, whether or not one is able to live with one's choices, and what happens if you cannot live with gratitude, and what happens if you cannot be patient, as he said, and accept the unfolding of your life. So that's happening between the 11th and 14th of July. Kaimabon, as I said, if you're interested, go to my website, which is janblakestories.co.uk, and you'll find everything you need there. Sign up, it's going to be great. We're going to have foraging walks, we're going to have storytelling, we're going to have me performing the story with my good friend and accompanist Pan Prader, his partner, the urban herbalist Roisin Riley, who's from the traveller community. She's from both Irish and Scottish traveller community. She's a medicinal herbalist. She'll be the one taking people on foraging walks. There'll be lots of time to relax as well, and lots of time to reflect and experience the story from your own life perspective.
That sounds like a rich experience. And I imagine Wales in July is quite a beautiful place to be. So
let's hope the weather
the weather
will be
holds
with us. Yeah.
I hope so. Yeah. Well, then I'll try to put this episode up as soon as I can then, so that
thank you.
that there's enough time for people to really feel that, and hopefully if they're drawn to it, to really take the plunge, because that sounds amazing.
Thank you. I hope people are drawn to it, and some of you will sign up for it.
Okay, well, thank you for being here today, Jan.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.